Save 32% on tickets when you get a Seattle Kraken Holiday 3-game pack presented by American Express. Each pack comes with 2 tickets to 3 legendary matchups and 2 pairs of holiday-themed Kraken socks. These packs feature games against division rivals and cross-conference powerhouse teams. Plus, they make a great holiday gift for the hockey fan in your life. While supplies last, for more information, head to seattlekraken.com/tickets.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Signals from the Deep, the official podcast of your Seattle Kraken, and as I like to say, the podcast tentacle of the Kraken Hockey Network. For this episode of Signals from the Deep, we're actually recording in 32 Bar and Grill. Kraken practice is taking place just behind us here, so we're overlooking the Starbucks rink there. So if you hear any sounds from practice, it's all part of the intentional environment. My name is Piper Shaw, and I am joined by our producer extraordinaire, Grant Beery. Grant, you're fresh off of a performance as PA announcer in beautiful Climate Pledge Arena on Indigenous Peoples Night. How did it go? Filling in for the great Chet.
Really enjoyed it. Indigenous Peoples Night was a great thing to be a part of. Always love our Common Thread nights, but it was also a shootout, so I got really the entire gamut of scenarios to go through, which we'll talk about later. But no, it was a lot of fun, and always love doing that. It's a dream of mine, and so to be able to fill in for Chet is quite the opportunity.
Yeah, you had a lot of action on on that evening. So.
Well, and it's funny. Last year, I filled in for Chet during we played the Wild. And it just so happened that we got shut out that night. So I didn't get to call a goal the first time, which I got to do last night. And I'm glad I got that off my list.
Thank you, Chandler Stevenson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stevie. So this episode of Signals from the Deep is episode number 23, which is so fitting because we have a very exciting announcement for all of you. Since the departure of Nick Olchek, we've been kind of looking out for a co-host for this podcast, and now he may feel that it's too formal of a word, but number 23 was one JT Brown's hockey number, the number that you identify the most with, I believe. So we're so excited to share with all of you that JT is going to be joining me permanently on Signals from the Deep. JT.
Well, I'm excited, right? And yes, you are right about the co-host and being a little bit too formal. Obviously, we have fun every time we've been able to get on this podcast. So that's how I'm looking at it. Just coming on, we're going to have great conversations just like we always do. And you know what, if you want to add the co-host title, I guess I'll have to be okay with it. But end of the day, it's just going to be fun to get to work with you guys.
Your name's going to be in the logo, buddy, so just deal with it.
All right, okay.
Number fine. 23, though, I wanted to start by talking about that since it also happens to be the episode number. How did you pick number 23? What's the story behind that for you?
Yeah, so, my dad started with my dad. My dad was number 23 when he played for the Minnesota Vikings, so obviously that was probably the first inspiration to try to be that number, and kind of started in college, started wearing that number. As I went to the pros, you don't always get the first opportunity, so going to Tampa, ended up starting with, well, first off, when you sign right away, and especially at the end of the year, when you're a rookie, you don't always get to choose your number. They just kind of hand you one and say, here you go. So I was number 49, and I believe that lasted for maybe like 2 games, maybe.
You didn't like that one?
Well, I was just happy to be there.
True,
at that point, it wasn't 23 wasn't even available on the team anyway, so it wasn't like I was looking to choose. I'm just happy leaving the college, getting an opportunity to play. And Stevie Y, GM at the time for Tampa, basically came down and was like, I don't like this number. Oh. And I'm like, I didn't choose it. At the end of the day, when your GM comes down and tells you that this number is not good, 49. So
especially when it's Stevie Y.
Yep. I was like, all right, so we're going to switch. Well, then I made a very bold decision, which again, it did not last very long either, but I picked 19, which was his number. And I'm like, afterwards, like I didn't even put that much thought into it. I just kind of like scrambled and just like, okay, I'll pick this one. And afterwards, I was like, "Oh, that's probably not I shouldn't have done that." That's
but did he yell at you about picking that, or was he like, "Well, that's a good number"?
That was fine. That was fine.
Yeah, I wonder what he thought. Like, he's like, "Oh, is he doing that
He's like,
to
"Is
make
this
me
guy
happy?"
good enough to wear my number though?"
He's probably thinking all of the above. But no, then ended up go to the American Hockey League after that, and got to use 23, and through Tampa's organization that opened up afterwards. So then I switched back to 23. I went to Minnesota and chose 71 because it wasn't available. Actually, first I went to Anaheim and I chose 71 because it wasn't available. It was their short term. Minnesota, same situation though. Went to 71 because that was the number I wore when I was playing for the Rosemount Irish back in my youth days. So when they do it, they do the numbers in the youth, or at least they did. Have 1 year would be, the first set and then the second. So like you could go like the year before me. I couldn't do 23 because the guy was 1 year older than me. So you had to be like 2 years apart from somebody with the same number, so that within the organization, depending upon what team you made, there wouldn't be a conflict. So like so that's why I had 71. So we had the second half. So my age group was like, or say the 89. So I was born in 90. So the 89 year births, like they were the first, like 1 through 27 or whatever the number, like the lower numbers, and then we took the higher ones.
Interesting. I wonder, I would imagine that was the same for Jake, my husband, when he was playing hockey growing up, because also in the state of Minnesota, but he pretty much claims that he was 15 like always and forever.
But
that's
I don't know how they did it for us.
Possible.
They made sure that the following years you didn't have the same number as somebody that would be going into that year. So I didn't get to do it then. So then, interestingly enough, Gustav Olofsson had number 23 with the Wild, and it was right before the first game of the year. I believe it was traded. Was he traded or waived? I'd have to double check. So in one way or another, he was relocated to another team, Montreal, I believe, and 23 opened up. And because I didn't play in the first game, I was like, hey, can I change? They had to call the league, figure out like how, if it was possible. And I ended up getting 23 back in Minnesota, which was kind of cool, obviously hometown. And, obviously the number means a lot for me with, my dad playing and obviously looking up to him. So kind of weird that, all the different ways of how I got back to the number 23 and got to use it. But, fitting that this is episode number 23, and, I'm just excited and looking forward to the rest of them as well.
How do you feel about the Miley Cyrus song 23? Do you know that
I've never
song?
heard it, no.
Oh, there's no way you've never heard it.
No, I never heard it.
Well, you've got homework now, so.
Yeah. We're not going to play
I
that on the podcast. It's not appropriate.
I leave every broadcast with homework, listening to John and Edzo talk about things that 90% of the time I have no idea what they're talking about.
I was literally thinking about this last night. I was like, we need to bring one of them on and onto the show and just throw things that people our age know all about. Be like, John, what's your favorite Pokemon? John, that is throw our cultural references at them and see how they do.
Every single game, and I'm just like, it's funny, like that. But at the same time, like I'm like on the talk back, talking to our producers and be like, what does he mean by what is that? What's going on? And
we don't have time.
And I always want to. I always want to back you up too, because my mic isn't live as often as yours is, obviously. But I'm always sitting there listening, like, JT, I don't know what the heck they're saying either. So I got your back.
Some stuff just doesn't make sense. I don't understand it, but obviously it's good banter back and forth. But I think that's a fantastic idea. Get them both, sit them down, and just start quizzing them.
Yeah. On our cultural reference.
We'll call it the generational gap episode, right?
I think that one would do some serious numbers.
Yeah.
Olofsson was traded on October 3rd of that year to the Montreal Canadiens. Okay. So very, very early in the season.
Yeah, so. I know I didn't play a game. I think it was like right away. I don't know when. Schedules they've changed since adding the bye week and having like the 2 weeks off. So it's kind of condensed and pushed everything. So I know that maybe it's a little started earlier. But
so if you had played a game, they wouldn't let you change your
number?
I
don't think so.
Okay.
That was my understanding. Maybe our equipment guys just didn't want to create another.
Like, this guy, I don't know.
Not worth it.
Maybe like that's too much work. He's new here, yada yada yada. Like, because it's the same thing. They did tell me in the beginning, like he's been in the organization. I'm like, no, that's fine. Like, I'll just choose a different number. This still has meaning to me. Obviously, being in Minnesota again, and then obviously I played my youth hockey there, so that was the number. So I wasn't too upset about it. But then when it opened up. Thank you for the research of when that happened.
It's my job as a producer.
Yeah, no, it just was kind of cool how it all worked out.
Yeah. All right. Well, JT, we're very happy that you are joining us here, but I do think it's time to get into a little bit of Kraken hockey talk.
If you say so.
A little bit of Kraken hockey talk. We have relatively recently, from the time of recording this, returned from a Kraken road trip, East Coast swing, that went overall quite well. So it starts in Carolina, 4-2 win, Islanders 5-2 win, Devils 3-2 loss, Rangers 7-5 win. We don't need to go in depth on all of these, but JT, what were just kind of your takeaways, your thoughts about the trip as a whole, and anything that just kind of stood out to you about those games?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned anytime you can go 3 out of 4 on a road trip, especially, we know that points are a premium in the National Hockey League. It's not easy to do, and you have to be able to string games together. Whether it's at home, whether it's on the road, you have to just keep building, throughout your game, and especially after the homestand that they did have just prior, to leaving and needing to kind of rebound, that was a really good road trip. And I really point out the first 2 games. I thought they were really dominant, especially it's a tough one to go into Carolina just with the way they play. Obviously, they have a lot of skill too. They really pushed the pace, and it was the Kraken who actually controlled the pace for pretty much the entire game. They got off to a hot start. Schwartz scores right away on the opening shift,
and held them to a 6-year low. I believe it was in 6 years their lowest shot total of the Carolina Hurricanes, because that's a volume shooting team. That also speaks to that dominant effort.
So yeah, I mean, you look at the dominance that's a great number. Obviously, I didn't know that was the 6 years.
I think it was 17,
even if it's the 1 or 2 year low, they kept them to a real dominant performance from the Kraken, and then they followed it up, right? And then they went into. You could argue that obviously the Islanders are in a different spot than Carolina, outside looking in, but
still a talented
you still have
group.
to do it. You still have to go play the game. And, a lot of times we always talk about playing to the competition. Well, you're not in a spot either as far as the Kraken are concerned to really go and look at a schedule and be like, oh, we should win this game or we can't this way. You just have to go out and play every single game. And they played to the same standard that they played to in Carolina. So watching that on a back-to-back and trying to find, that's the one thing you would say for the Kraken so far this year is finding that consistency, right? We've seen games where it was, really, really good, or a shift off or a period off, and then all of a sudden you kind of have to rebound. So for me, just watching those 2 games that, as much of a 60-minute effort as you could possibly do, I don't necessarily, it's kind of a nuance. It's impossible to play a 60-minute game. The other team is going to have some time where they're in your zone, where they're, have the momentum on their side. So 60 minutes, is it really possible? No, but I understand why we talk about it, why we talk about playing a full game. And, that's as close as you could probably get to in those 2 games. And, I look at the Devils game, even though it's a loss, there's still things to build off of from that game. And, a second night of a back-to-back, you're on an East Coast swing. You got the travel that's obviously involved with that as well.
The best power play in the league.
A very good, very
and
fast.
And they were shooting from all angles. That was crazy.
Yep.
No, Luke Hughes' goal was... what an angle he found there.
And then you look at, that was, again, it's hard to go into each game. You have to treat each one separately, but at the same time, I just look at the building blocks. And yes, do I think it was their best game? Probably not, but I also think that they were in the game, and that's really what you're asking for, especially on the road against a very good team. You're on the second night of a back-to-back, and maybe those are excuses of why, but at the end of the day, you want to give yourself a chance, and that's the same way I look at whether it's a goaltending performance or the play of the team. Did you give yourself an opportunity? Did you have a chance to win that game? And they sure did. They pressed late. The opportunity that Montour had off the backhand very late in the third period that just ended up going wide. But so they had their opportunities, and I just like that they built off of how they played, and then New York was a wild one. That's probably the only way to think about that.
Okay, before we get to New York, I want to just circle back to the Devils game really, really quick. I'm just curious, as a player, knowing how well they played against one of the best teams in the league in that power play and just how they managed that one. Is there such a thing as a moral victory? You don't get 2 points. You don't even get 1. But is it more that confidence of the building, or is it just no, we still didn't win and you don't care?
I'm sure there's some people who do. I personally just don't necessarily like to think of a moral victory, because at the end of the day, when I was playing or when you're going out, your job is to win the game, right? And you didn't do that. So at some part or some facet of the game, you failed. But for me, I always try to look at more of the building blocks of, did you continue to grow or progress from the other games? And again, did I think it was their best game? No, but at the end of the day, you find a way to stay in it. And there's going to be games we talk about on the broadcast where you just don't have everything. Maybe it's tired. Maybe it's, the other team's just playing really well and there's not a whole lot you can do, but you have to find a way. And for me, that was one of those games where you see the Kraken grow in a sense where it very well, you actually could say, hey, back-to-back, very good team. They could have blown them out, right? And you'd be like, it was a back-to-back.
Yeah, and they hadn't had a game in like 5 days or something.
Yeah, they were well rested, right? They didn't have a game since Monday. And it's like you could have thrown all those excuses, but they didn't. They still were in the game. It didn't end up working out as far as the points are concerned, but I like to look at it from a standpoint of not necessarily the moral victory, but just how did you play? How did you build? And after those first two performances, it's kind of hard to really build off that. Like, how much more dominant can you be in two different games? But at the same time, you have to win in different ways in this league. It's not always going to be a 6-1 win, or you're not even going to win them 1-0 every single time. You have to find ways, and that for me is one of the things you see in the growth of this team, and that's what you want to see is when you don't have your best stuff, are you still in the game? And for me, that's what they did.
Now, sorry, as you hear from fans when we play non-conference teams, over on the East Coast that, it's not that bad because we didn't give up any points to a division or a conference team. Does it sting a little less when you lose those games out of the conference?
No. I think
still hurts.
Yeah, at the end of the day, 2 points is 2 points, right? And you didn't get them. I think that comes into play when you're talking about overtime, right? Like, so if you're going into the game versus Florida and you end up in shootout and it's like, hey, you gave them a free point, or I guess the other way, they would say they gave the Kraken a free point and they got the extra one. It's like, it's not the end of the world when it comes down to the opposite division, or, when you're going on the Eastern Conference when you're only talking about that 1 point. But when you're talking about getting the two or winning or just losing the game, like, it still matters. It's a huge deal.
Especially for this team. I mean, they need every point they can get right now.
You're looking at playing NHL 500 hockey or hovering right around there, at that point too. So usually, anything could probably happen, but usually 500 hockey is not going to get you to the playoffs, right? You have to go on a little bit of a run here if you're the Kraken, and that's why that road trip was so important. And then even if you go back to the Florida game which we're jumping kind of now, but we're talking about finding a way to get points. Like, I don't think it was maybe the best game for the Kraken, but you found a way to get a point. That point
against the reigning Stanley Cup champions.
That point is, you would love to have had two, but that point is huge. So just trying to find a way to manufacture that. So does it still hurt the same? Yes, because you didn't get 2 points. You didn't move up the standings. You didn't. I guess you probably didn't go down because you can't lose points. But at the end of the day, you still want to get every single point you can, but it only really comes into play where it's like, it's the other division or another conference. Like, that only comes into play for, at least from my mindset and how I've kind of gone to think about it, is more so when it comes to, just going to overtime, but you need every 2 points you possibly can.
Yeah. Well, speaking of finding ways to win, let's go back to that New York Rangers game. 7-5. An entertaining game for sure to watch, to cover that game. I was pivoting my interviews. Those questions were getting pivoted like every 60 seconds. I was like, okay, now it's this, now it's this, now it's this. Just what did you think of that, and how does that kind of speak to your comments earlier about finding ways to win, but also 60-minute effort? ?
Oh, that's interesting, right? Like, it was a very, very wild game, and you can almost break that entire game into 3, maybe 4, but I would say 3 is just kind of safe on how you look at it. Like, it was almost 3 separate games, and you have to really break down each one of them kind of differently.
The first half of that second period, I was like, we are lucky we are still on the ice right now, frankly.
You look at even the first period, right? Like, New York the Rangers came out, they were playing really good hockey. Like, they were kind of on their heels, maybe sitting back a little bit for the Kraken side, but you go second period, right? It's like a dominant.
They score early, and then it was like they just sat back a little bit, it seemed.
And then but like you said, second period, like, it can be 2 halves of just even the second period. And then I just look at all the different score changes, right? Like, you're down 3-1. Then all of a sudden the Kraken end up scoring enough to make it 6-3. It's like, okay, now but at the same time, that's the hard part.
The power play's clicking, and it's like, oh my gosh.
How do you not get complacent, right? Like, we always, it's the joke, but because any lead is a good lead in hockey. They're like, a 2-goal lead's the worst lead in hockey. And it's like, all right, we got 3. So, like, you're sitting pretty, and it's hard not to, like, let your foot off the gas pedal in a sense, and not to say that they did. Like, no one's ever really trying to. The other team just gets more desperate. That's how I really look at it, right? Mm-hmm. They played really well. Then they didn't play. And then they're like, oh, man, we got to hurry up. We got to push this back. And now all of a sudden you're in the third period and you see slowly but surely momentum kind of starts going to their side and you have a comfortable lead. And then all of a sudden you're looking at like, oh, you're holding on for dear life, right? And I think
that was an emotional game for them, I would imagine.
A roller coaster for sure, right? Yeah. Like, and you have to find a way. And I think both teams would go out of that game, whether they won or lost. I don't think you're proud of how that game goes. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting part, right? Like, I still, obviously as a broadcaster, you're in the moment, you're talking about this game and you're trying to figure out, obviously there's a lot of positive things. But at the same time, I'm looking at it like there's a lot of negatives too. Right. Like, no one is sitting there being like, yeah, we want to go win 7-5 every single game, which again, I think from a fan standpoint and from a broadcast and from being able to, I mean, the more goals, the merrier, right? Yes, it's the entertainment value of those games are awesome. Or I think back to the game a few years back in LA. Was it 9-8 or was it
9-8?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot.
In my mind, it was 12-13.
Exactly. I couldn't look away because the puck just kept going in for both sides. Obviously, this one was a little bit different. There were stretches and you could see the play going back and forth, but those games are they're weird because I kind of am like sitting there like, oh yeah, as a broadcast, like this is fun and it's great for the fans to see this many goals, but I'm also thinking like, man, defensively, like what do we have to work on here? But you also can't, like at the end of the day, it's a lot of goals. They're having a good time, like we're scoring and everybody's smiling, but I look at it from maybe a coaching perspective or look at it from a player's perspective where it's like after that game, you're like, oof. Let's say we got the 2 points, but man, man. Yeah, right. Right. I don't know if they did video on that game, but if I'm sitting there, I'm like, maybe we just don't watch this game because there's like all the good things are good, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, we're just going to forget about this one. I look at it as like, you want to win a 4-2 game, right? Like, or there's still offense.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
just
there's
like
also maybe an empty, you put an empty net in, like 3-2, and then you get the empty net. So it's like a close game. It's fun. You get to talk about, both sides. Obviously, 7-0 would be great for the Kraken, but it's also makes for an interesting broadcast in that sense too, or getting blown out the other way. Like all broadcasts are different. All broadcasts
Sometimes
are fun.
A blowout, though, even if it is going your team's way, it can be fun to like call. But if you're just dominating, then there's also maybe not a ton to talk about. You know, like
it starts to be the same over.
How
and
do you
over.
explain this?
What's the threshold? Like, is 10 goals the threshold? You were like, ooh, we got to really look at what happened here. Like how many goals in a game?
Again,
like,
they're gonna
probably depends how you earn them.
Don't get me wrong, they're gonna look. They're gonna look at the video, right?
You give up 3 empty netters. I don't know.
They're gonna see, whether if it was a breakdown on a play or if it's just, hey, you know what? I think you don't have to show the ones who's like, they just made. Sometimes you have to give credit to the other team, right? And I'll look at the same thing with the Kraken when it goes like, there's nothing that they could have really done. Like it was just perfect passing, perfect execution, ends up into the back of the net, and at the end of the day, like there's no sense of harping that. But at the same time, if you're making reads over and over, it's a turnover at the front or at the blue line and it ends up going back the other way. Like maybe you should look at that. But at the same time, those games are just hard, right? Because there's not a ton to learn from it because it's just an interesting game.
It's funny how those same things, it's like even when we are doing our jobs, and for me specifically, like right after those moments, like I have to go talk to the guys live and, get their feelings, but also have it be accurate. Like you won, but what did you really feel about that?
You don't feel good on how that game went.
Exactly. So it's like kind of figuring out like how to read the sense of the game in the room in that way. But it's also funny because now we have coaches at the second intermission. Obviously, I had Jessica Campbell that day, and my questions to her after the second period literally changed like 25 times because at first it was like, how is the team doing in transition? Which the answer should be probably not very well, but that's not for me to say, that's for like coaches to answer. And then it was like, okay, now the power play is playing really, really well. Now that's the question. Now this is no longer the question. Now you have a lead. Like it just evolves. So it makes it fun, like for my role, because you're pivoting constantly, but it also kind of makes it like stressful because it's like, are we reading this situation accurately when we have 35 seconds to do this?
And I mean, I think the other side too is like from my side, it's a little different too. Like 'cause you're looking at plays, but also you're up 6-3. So it's like, do you really need to harp on one little mistake? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's 6-5. Like, well, dang, we could have harped on that one. Now it's already
Yeah.
moving back, like it's closer. So it's like it's just the ebbs and flows of a game. And again, it just makes things very interesting when they're that type of games. And again, either way, we're going to call them. We're going to have a fun time doing it. Obviously, with the broadcast crew that we have, it's always endless entertainment, but also, you know what? It's fun. How about we put it that? We have fun. We obviously we love what we do, and that's what makes it so fun.
So speaking of one more fun thing that happened that day during the Rangers game, and something that, man, I sit outside the locker room for all these games, so I never get to be like up in the booth with you guys because I would love to hear what John was saying that morning. But unfortunately, Joey Decord was ill on the morning of the Rangers game, so he was not going to be available. So Philip Grubauer got the call, but that meant that they needed somebody to back him up on very short notice. So we found out just before the game, basically, that the Kraken had signed a goaltender named Michael Mattias to an amateur tryout contract that morning. I guess he played midget and bantam hockey with the Kraken's team services director. I don't know if Brennan's name is director or manager, but team services. Brennan Baxendall.
I like director. Sounds good.
I just don't know what his formal title exactly is.
If it's not director, we're going to change.
His formal title to me is Baxi. So Baxi played hockey with him growing up. So luckily he was just like in the area, and he was out getting baby formula for his newborn child that was born 2 weeks earlier. His first kid, when he got the call that he needed to come dress for an NHL hockey game in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, of all places too, the world's most famous arena too. I couldn't even imagine like what that would be like, from his side. I can only think like for myself, like getting to go into the first game or like first time put under, walking out, seeing all the people and like how amazing, maybe a little, it could be, I would say even I was intimidated the first game, like a little interesting to start, but I think as you go through, it's just like a one in a lifetime opportunity that not a lot of people get to, right? Obviously, you look at the percentages of players who just play hockey or pick up a hockey stick that end up making it to even college, where he ended up playing, wasn't it in Anchorage, Alaska, and to get to a college level, right? And then it's like, oh, well, the number just keeps going down when you talk about going to pro hockey, and you can get into the AHL or in all the other league, ECHL, or going overseas, and it's still like the numbers are just so small, and the opportunity that was there and how cool it would be to just be in that sense. And again, a whirlwind is probably the first thing, right? Like
I saw him walk in. He got there like 10 minutes before warm-ups.
Wow.
Or like 12,
it is
12
New York
minutes
City,
before
so
warm-ups.
the traffic.
For sure. And they had Ricky Olczyk, the assistant general manager, had a contract sitting there.
Right there, yeah.
Ready with the pen. He's like, hey, Michael, come sign this.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's
so cool to
he'll
see.
always remember that, right? Like somebody's never going to forget that situation, and obviously don't know exactly how it went, but I can only imagine that, like, the guys in the room and how well that they treated and how cool of the experience that was, not only for the players, but also for, him as well. Like, cause I've never done that. I've never had an emergency, or this case was an ATO, where you have an emergency goalie come in to a game. But I have had where they come out to practice. I believe in Minnesota, I'm pretty sure he was a firefighter and like would get the call if a goaltender, maybe took a shot and needed a day, or, not feeling well the same way Joey was, but it's a practice day, but we still need to play and we still need to work, but you need a second goalie out there. And, what value they get to bring out to the ice to allow everybody to keep going, and what part, obviously, sometimes it may seem insignificant, but it means a lot, obviously, to the players, to the coaches, to everybody else, to have those guys available, to come out to a practice and to, be a part of the team in that sense. So I can only imagine when it comes to like an actual game, and, obviously thinking too about what he was thinking when early in the game Grubauer got hit and went down. And, obviously he's grabbing his head. Obviously, first things first, you think of Grubauer, you hope he's okay.
Yeah.
But you don't want to see him get injured. Obviously, head contact. Goalie helmets are also not designed really that way either, right? Like, obviously they get hit in the mask with pucks and stuff, and nobody really is designed to get hit. But obviously the way the helmets are made now, players are obviously a lot safer when it comes to getting hit there. But But then I think the funny part for me, I remember we did put it on the broadcast at one point. It was kind of Larson with his glove over his mouth, and they were kind of like whispering back and forth and like smiling. And you can only imagine he's saying like, "Hey, you thought you probably had to go in there," and he's like, "Yeah," and they're kind of like joking back and forth. So just kind of having that little bit of an experience would be something. Obviously, I think the players would respect it, but I can only understand, what he was going through on the bench, and it would be pretty awesome.
And that actually happened in a Carolina Hurricanes game that one John Forsland was calling. If you're not familiar with this story, there is so much coverage of it all over the internet. David Aries is his name. He was a Zamboni driver, I believe. So what was it like for you to be up in the booth with John while all this is unfolding? Also, keep in mind, this was a very early game, or was it at 1 or was it? Okay, it was at 1. So not that early. 1, in New York, so even earlier for folks in Seattle.
Which is what pretty much made this happen because it was an early game. There's no way you're going to get a call up from Coachella.
Exactly.
I mean, if this had been a 1 o'clock game in Seattle, you probably just call up a guy and he'd be here in 2 hours.
Probably, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
I wondered what that was like because it was chaos for all of us. Like I said, he didn't even get there until 12 minutes before warm-up. So like everything in our pregame show and our prep, like we're getting all this last-minute information. I just wonder what the tone was in the booth.
Yeah, no,
Mr. Forsland.
it was interesting, right? Like it's a little bit different circumstances, and when David Aries went into the game, I remember John was talking. I can't remember what period he said he went in, but he's like, we didn't even have his name. Like we didn't know everything about. So he's like, I'm Googling as the play's going on. He's on his phone. He's looking for all those things. So obviously, thank you to our staff to be able to get us the information we needed, because at the end of the day too, we want to make sure we do justice not only for the story of him, we're talking about him having a baby and being there, getting a baby formula and getting the call and finding the connection to Baxi. You want to do that story justice as well, but also there is a real opportunity that he could get into the game, no different than how we prepare for every other game that's that's coming up on the schedule. We want to make sure that each person, we have the research, we have names, and then you had to go through all of that. And, that part was probably a little bit stressful because it's already a 1 o'clock game, so there's no morning skate, right? So we're already looking like, all right, what are the lines going to be? What's going to be this? Oh, we're hearing that Joey might not play. He's going to be sick. And then you look at
is Yanni available or not,
yes,
which was also
correct.
A game time decision.
And then you remember on that side, too, Shesterkin's wife was having a baby, too, so on the Ranger side. So there was a lot of...
Jonathan Quick had to go in last minute, too, for the Rangers.
So and then they call up and get a call up from their team, and it's like, okay, so there was just a lot of moving parts, and I think that's the one thing, obviously, with, our job, and especially with Johnny and the professionalism, like, I think that's the side where it's like kind of... not on edge, but just kind of a little bit because you just want to do...
You just want to do a good job, and you need information to do a good job
especially,
in our role.
Especially with the early game and not having the time, to
prepare.
I mean, obviously we were prepared.
Prepared everything else, obviously.
Yes, okay, I just wanted to put it out there. Like we didn't go into the 1 o'clock game. No notes, no preparation, no. No, like you want to do it right. And I think that was kind of the sentiment. So obviously a little bit of a stressful situation, but obviously as soon as we started getting the text and more information started flowing in, but it was obviously funny to be able to kind of listen to John's story about David Aries and when he goes in and, talking about how he let in the first shot of the game and then basically stopped everything else, had like 2 or 3 big saves going forward. And it's like, man, just a crazy experience. Yeah. And again, that's why you want to have the information. You want to make sure that you get the story right. And it even went down.
You only get one chance. Like, this is live. You only get one opportunity to, this is a history-making, a life-making moment for somebody potentially.
Well, we wanted, even down to like nicknames and like, what is it? How do you call it? Like, how do we pronounce the names? And you want to get all those things right on a regular basis, but even more so in this situation. So I think there was a little bit of stress and a little bit of chaos in it. But again, we got the information as, it came through. And again, it was just a kind of a cool experience. Obviously, didn't end up going into the game, but you look at it, you get to keep a jersey, go through, and just kind of just get to that experience, especially somebody living in New York, and to play at the world's famous, or the world's most famous arena, and
against the New York Rangers, like just crazy, and in that game, sitting on the bench in that game,
a lot of fun, right? Like you just think of the stories and, obviously being a new parent and like how he's going to explain that to his kid one day and like how
She just got the best story for the bar ever.
I mean, again, it's probably one of those situations, like if there wasn't pictures or video or, the entire broadcast, like, are you going to believe him? Like, maybe not. I don't know. But obviously there's definite proof. He's got the contract. He's got everything. So it's definitely a cool experience. But, just another wild way to cap off a wild game that would eventually play itself out.
So, and that wild game came after a huge piece of wild news for the New York Rangers as well. A little bit of controversy surrounding their former captain. Jacob Trouba was traded. He is now an Anaheim Duck. And JT, to trade your captain mid-season like that and kind of the publicity that was around it about, the no trade contract or the no trade clauses that he had or for which teams and had they expired, just like the variety of things. What do you kind of make of that from a player and like a business perspective? What were you thinking while you were reading and hearing about how that was working out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you follow the social media and getting to see, obviously, I think it was out there, right? Like that they had been shopping and had been looking. And I had never really been in that spot, but I've been around guys that, their name has been floated by an insider that's saying they're looking to trade you or even, the team outrightly saying like, he's available. We're looking for this. So like, I don't know how that would feel like it's from a player's side. I know it's probably tough, especially as a captain to continue to, be that type of leader. And I'm sure he was, but I know that at the same time, that would be a struggle, right? I feel like you'd be conflicted in that sense. So I look at it from a player side and it's tough, right? Like you did everything right. You got your contract, you signed it. And then obviously we look into the, whether it's threats of if you don't waive your no trade clause, we're going to
We're going to waive our captain, Jacob Trouba.
Yep. And like, obviously, you worked for that, right? You worked for a no trade, but I also understand at the end of the day, a no trade is different than a no move. And, a lot of times, especially in longer term contracts, the no move will be in the front half, right? And as a player gets older or as, contracts start to, maybe you're not playing to the same level of that contract, not saying
as
he
wasn't,
ages, but as the contract ages, that's where you get rid of the no move. So at least you have an option. Obviously the player is still protected when it comes to, having a 15 team, no trade where obviously, because if you didn't have a no trade, there would have been no issue, right? There would have been no story out, I guess, really on Twitter. Obviously, it would have been news that you're trading your captain. So I guess it's kind of conflicting when I look at it because I understand the business side of the decision and how it works and the difference, I guess, between the two. But also some part of you as like a player is like, it just doesn't feel good. Right. But obviously the team's within their right. They did what they needed to do to clear cap space. Who knows if they're going to be done making moves. You look at that Rangers roster as to who they have, and especially when you talk about the goaltending position, you look at the forwards as well. The defensive core probably should be doing better than they are right now.
Definitely.
And sometimes that happens, right? When your team, I don't want to say underperforming because I don't know what their expectations, but I think from the public perception, obviously underperforming and something needed to move. Don't know what the dynamic was with him in the locker room. From reports, it was fine, but I'm not there. We're not there on an everyday basis. So maybe it was something they needed to do. But at the end of the day, they made a decision. They went through with it. And as a player, it's hard to like kind of grasp at times because you earned that contract. You earned the no trade.
He said too that a big reason that he didn't want to move to certain places was because of his wife, who I don't know if she was in residency or if she was working, but either way, she's a doctor and like her job is not something that she can just like pick up and move anywhere to, or at least that's what I read online.
And I think
that was like a factor in it, but that Anaheim was correct. It sounds like a good spot for both of them. So
you hope that it all, it all works out. And again, either way, I mean, that's where I feel like it's situations like these. It's situations where, a guy gets traded right after having a kid, or, you've been in a spot for so long and get put on waivers and moved, or even just traded in that sense. Like as much as this is a game, it's fun. Obviously the players play for the love of the game, but at the end of the day, like it's those moments when you realize that this is a business at the end of the day too. Like, there's a lot of bosses, right? Like as a player, our whole goal is to, you're winning the Stanley Cup, right? You go out, you play the game you want to win, but at the end of the day, there's higher up. I mean, you got the GM, you have all these people that are making these decisions, and they're not always easy, but they're obviously doing what they think is the best opportunity for the team moving forward. And that may not be in what's the player's best interest, right, or what they want. But again, I think those are the moments where, again, you find out pretty quickly, getting into this league, whether it's, your friends are traded or the waiver period, or same with this one where it comes out that, hey, we're looking to shop you. It's like, man, I just signed a contract, or I thought things were going good. Why are we moving?
And to find out that way, you're at risk of that too.
It's definitely a business at the end of the day. Obviously, you're well compensated to play in this league, so there's no
pouting.
Exactly. They're not trying to throw a pity party on it, because at the end of the day, we signed up for this. You're
financially able to move and be just fine.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. It may not be the situation you want to be in, but also I think at the other side of it, at least how I looked at it, I mean, again, I got put on waivers and was in Tampa for a long time, ended up going to Anaheim. It was a new opportunity for me, right? Obviously it wasn't great. But at the end, I just bought a house in Florida, and I was like, man, this kind of stinks. But at the same time, all right, well, maybe I'm going to get more playing time. This is a new opportunity. So you kind of have to look at it from another sense. And again, do I, hold the hard feeling? No, it's part of what's going on. You had younger players that were, needing an opportunity. They needed an opportunity to show what they had. And do you get mad at that? No, you got to just try to find a way to direct it the right way. So, long story short, the game's a business at the end of the day. And again, as much as it may feel weird, it was perfectly within, they're not going to change anything about this. I mean, again, at the end of the day, if you want that, then you need a no move, which is different than a no trade. So it's definitely a weird situation, and one you don't see that often. That's why I think myself, you can go to you or even everybody online, has an opinion or has this type of gut reaction to it, because it's just not something that happens every day.
And especially when it's your captain and you're the New York Rangers and you're the struggling New York Rangers and it's Jacob Trouba. I think that all of those factors just made it ripe for conversation and controversy.
That's the point, right? And that's why, it's fun to get on here. We can talk about it. It's not just cut and dry, right? This isn't just a black and white situation where it has to be one way or the other. It is a weird situation, but at the end of the day, man, I don't know how I would. I mean, actually, I do know how I'd feel, but that's for another day. I think you probably,
I have a feeling.
I
have a feeling I know how you'd feel. Hey, but that's why it's so great also to have you here to be able to offer that perspective on these situations. So thank you for that perspective.
Well, I'm here for good. So.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, you don't have to offer this perspective anymore.
Well, okay, but there's a variety of things your perspective is valuable, including this. So we're going to take some listener questions. We put out a series of tweets and Blue Sky posts, and I had an Instagram post fielding some questions a couple weeks ago, and we got so many questions that we did not have time.
We're going to be running through them for a while,
Yeah, so this question comes from Indigo Armadillo. Great username, by the way. I love that. And it says, shift changes. Can someone please explain how players know how to execute these? Feels like we have the perfect man to answer this question. I was trying to talk through this with Jake. How would I concisely explain this to somebody who has not been ingrained in it? And you're here for that. Even better.
Well, I'll take it away then. Yeah. There's multiple ways, right? The first one I think is we just have an internal, I think you have an internal body clock of you want to be in that 45 second, try to keep your shifts under a minute. And I think just if you're going hard, if you're skating hard and you're moving, you're tired at that point. Not so tired that you're bent over and you can't breathe, but you start to feel the gap of when you were fresh and just got on the ice to win that. So it's kind of time to change, but you also have to look at it from a standpoint of, did I just go up the ice? So you're going up the ice on the offensive side, you come back and you play defense. More often than not, the next time you go up the ice, you're going to change.
Right.
Because otherwise, you're going to go out, you're going to play offense again, which everybody wants to play offense. You want to get that second opportunity down the offensive zone, but you can't change on the way back, right? So then you're going to have to, so you just did offense, defense, offense, defense. Now you're looking at...
Could be 2 minutes.
A minute and a half to 2 minutes into your shift, and you get stuck out there, right? So... a lot of teams do look at, time on ice, what is your shift length? Obviously, on the power play, it ends up being different. If you're out there, you can get stuck. It does happen. We talk about the changes in the second period on how hard it is. So I think internally, we have a tired clock, I guess you could say, and just figuring out where that is. And then on the other side of it, you look at where you are, what's gone on so far. Are you going to be able to play one or two more times? But I also think there's times too where if you look at matchups, right? Like I know when I was playing, a lot of times I would have to be playing against sometimes their top line or maybe their second line. We were trying to shut them down. Like that was our role. So if they were out there, or
you got to get out there.
Or, there's times where, let's just say you're the away team and the other team changes lines. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to get in and get off because we want to match up. We know that
we want that
I
matchup,
want Yanni Gord's line or Matty Benier's line to be playing. That's the matchup we're going against this. Well, I'm out here. Well, we're going to get off and we're going to change so that we can get the matchup back to where, the team wants it. A lot of times the coach too will, whether it's more times in the neutral zone, will kind of look and maybe it's a whistle or they have a signal, but they'll let you know change as soon as you get up the ice because they have something you want to do. Not always can, whether it's an icing, there could be different situations. So there's a lot of ways on how, but as far as the nuance of like more off, I'm assuming this is probably more asked from a sense of like, how do you know when, like, is it tired or is it this? Like, when do you know? That's kind of how you know. It's just we've been ingrained to try to find
It's part of the rhythm of the game that just gets ingrained into you.
It usually works out that way where you do, a 15 to 20 seconds in your D zone and then you go back and play offense for 20 and now all of a sudden you're getting close and it's like, all right, we need a few more seconds. And it ends up being around 40 to 50 seconds. That'd be the ideal for most people, and just how, almost every coach talks about that 45 to 50. Like once you start getting over a minute, obviously forward to defense is a little bit different as well. Sometimes they cannot get off. But from a forward side, that's how I always looked at it and how it just kind of works.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about the matchups, obviously the home team gets the last change.
Yep.
Does that actually give enough of a benefit or an advantage? Or do you feel like we've already reached an era where people are working around that?
It's definitely an advantage. There's times where, a line maybe just isn't doing well against another line. And if you're the home team, you can exploit that. You can give them another opportunity. I also look at it from a standpoint of if you get, or again, it's also looking like an icing, right? Like you always look at who's out on the ice, or, when you get the last change, maybe it's on the right side and they have a left-handed centerman out there, so they're on their bad side. Well, guess what? If I have
then you want your strong side.
You want your stronger center, or you can look at. They do a lot of analytics now too. It's like, guess what? Matty Beniers is 8 for 10 against this player, and that's the player that's out on the ice right now for the other team. I can go get because I just based on the numbers. Matty has a better chance of winning this offensive zone faceoff against this guy than anybody else. You can look at that as the end of the game, right? Like in the final situations, whether you're on offense or you're on defense, how you want that to go. So I think there's definitely situations where it does. And obviously at the end of the day, both teams just have to go play. You can't overanalyze the matchups, right?
And it moves quickly. You don't really have time to, once you're in game.
Correct. You want to go, but also you don't want to break up the fabric, like how the flow of how the things are going. You obviously, a lot of times it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then all of a sudden you're like, we're going to go 1, 2, 3 back to 1 as far as the lines, as I'm saying, like first line, second line, third, fourth, as you go on. Again, sometimes it's like, hey, you just got to go. Maybe you're out against it's fourth line versus first line on the other team. You just have to go do it and you have to go play the game. So it does make a difference. Is it every single time? No, but there's going to be that odd situation or, once or twice a game where you get a great scoring chance or you end up scoring based off of a line change because you're at home. Right. And again, that's all you're looking for, right? I think that's the game of sports. Doesn't matter what sport you are in, you're always trying to gain a fair legal advantage.
Right.
But that is one of the ways, right? Within the rules, you want to gain an advantage. And, that's the one good thing about hockey in this sense is they're trying to give the home team an advantage. Beyond the fact that you have the crowd, you have everything else on you. You want, one more way for that to happen.
Yep.
All right, so our next question here comes from ArtZ945. And they say, how do you watch games and who decides what coach does an interview during intermission? As far as who decides, there's really not necessarily a decision. They're just in a rotation. On this last road trip, we had to miss the rotation just a little bit because Coach Campbell was a little bit under the weather, so we gave her a game off, had Bob Woods come do it again. But, yeah, it's just a rotation, so there's nothing formal behind that masterminding there. But I think it's been awesome to have the coaches on at the second intermission this year. That's been a change. We used to always have players on. And I think even sometimes when the game is going very, very well, but particularly if it's not going well, it's nice to be able to kind of get that unique perspective. Plus, let one of the guys like rest and go regroup if it's not going well in particular. That's always nice. So I've liked that. I've liked that shift, you could say, here on the Kraken Hockey Network.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. It's a different insight, right? Like, I know a lot of people will complain at times with not just saying hockey, like this team, but just players' answers in general, right? Like that.
Yes.
We got to get pucks in deep.
Yes.
We got to screen the goal. And they have the more generic answers. It's sometimes nice to hear from, the coaches from their aspect or from their perspective, what they're seeing, because they see the game differently than, I guess, a player on the ice. No differently than we would see the game differently watching it, because it's different on ice level. Like, I'll even say it's different on ice level from the standpoint of being in between the benches versus being up in the press box. And when those games are different, when you're up top, the game moves slower, right? You see things from a different vantage point.
Every time I get to make my way up to the press box to actually watch a game, I'm so jealous that you guys get to watch it from up there, because to answer the other half of this question, I sit and watch every single hockey game off of a monitor the size of a laptop screen sitting outside of the locker room. So I don't see any of the game live. I am literally watching the same thing that you guys are watching on the broadcast. Anyway.
I got two of the best seats in the house.
Exactly. You get two unique perspectives.
Up top, it's fun. And then obviously when you're down in between the benches, you get a different perspective. And that's where, player also, when you come from a player standpoint, they just got off the ice. Sometimes they go back to the room, maybe get a drink of water or kind of settle down. But a lot of times it's just right after getting off the ice, whether you could have been on the ice. You might be winded. It's hard to think of exactly what you want to say, and so you end up just going back as we have I'll
let him in.
Okay, let him in.
Edzo's looking on.
Edzo's banging on the door. He wants in on the recording.
What's going on in here?
Oh, we're just having a nice little recording for the podcast.
We're recording the podcast.
Say hello.
Say hello.
Say hello.
Yeah, say hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
Well, Piper,
yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. What a
live?
surprise!
Yeah, well, I guess not live, but it will go out.
Is it live to tape? Is that
I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Edzo. We have one of these days. We're gonna get you and Johnny on here. Yes, just wait.
Do I have to?
And no, well, you don't ever have to.
Don't tell any. I know you got millions of listeners, but don't tell John. I don't want to be on with Johnny because,
we know.
I mean, I drive with him a lot, and
Piper and I.
Yes.
Want to quiz you guys on
our cultural references
the same way
That's a bad idea. It's nice being with you. Sorry to interrupt.
So that we're going to work on it.
You guys do to JT all the time.
But I will say this though. At least we have the common courtesy to at least try to include you and go, JT, anything?
Yeah,
right?
I know. That's fair.
Don't try to leave you on a diving board.
We'll just take 5 minutes, maybe like 3 or 4.
5 minutes, yeah. Okay, I think 3 or 4 would be.
Okay, yeah. We don't need to do an hour-long episode for it, but I'm sure the people will want it.
Is it like the game show where I can have a lifeline?
Yeah. We'll give you a lifeline.
Could I?
Yep.
All right, I'll have Nick on speed dial.
I love it.
I love it.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Edzo. No, it's great.
Thanks for interrupting.
I don't remember where we were.
I think we were just talking about different perspectives of watching.
From the players. And the player being on onto the ice and then getting off and doing an interview. And I mean, I did it too. I know that there's probably can answer any question with about 5 or 6 answers as far as the hockey game is concerned. But it's nice to see a different perspective. But at the same time, you don't blame the players for that either. But at the same time, it's nice to kind of hear the coaches and see what they're thinking. And at the end of the day, the more viewpoints we get to put out, the more viewpoints that our fans get to see as well. I think it only enhances not only the broadcast, but the knowledge of the team and what they're thinking and how, I guess it just as a whole, as the team, when you get to hear from them, it just kind of changes that dynamic a little bit.
And it colors the picture differently and more fully too. It's just like you and Edzo are both former players, but completely different perspectives on a lot of things and a lot of shared perspectives as well. So
yeah, well, it's also nice too. Every once in a while, they will, basically say everything that Edzo and I or John and I had been talking about on the broadcast. So that's kind of nice when they
validating. Yeah, you're like, okay, good.
Because again, everybody does see the game differently and what they're seeing versus what we're seeing, and every once in a while it is kind of nice because, players aren't necessarily always going to be in that mindset or that mode. Sometimes we have to talk about it from a different perspective. Maybe it's more from the coaches or from trade, from what tactically needs to change in a period. And then they're like, that's exactly what I said. I'm like, yes.
Yes.
And they're not listening. We have no direct communication, right? So it's kind of cool.
A lot of our players are pretty great at actually listening to what I've asked and answering that question, but sometimes it's very clear that I'm like, did you hear what I said? But that's okay. They're tired. This is not where their headspace needs to be.
That I was not saying that our players have bad answers.
Oh, no.
I was just saying that in general, hockey players,
athletes in general.
Yes, I guess athletes for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Just want to put that out there.
And politicians.
Because I was part of that, so I feel like I can say that.
Right. I watched so many clips of the Wicked press tour, the movie Wicked, everyone. This is a little bit of a bird walk for a moment, but I watched so much of Cynthia Erivo, I think is her last name, and Ariana Grande, and they literally say the same thing, every single interview too. So,
they're being interviewed by dozens of people in the same day, right?
Yeah, so, pretty much. And that's a press tour. So anyway, you can't reinvent the wheel every time, right? Okay, our next question here. This, I think, is going to be our last question here. This comes from Kraken Fan 32. Wow, great name. On Blue Sky. It says, if you were stuck on a deserted island, which player would you want with you?
Oh, this one's easy.
I think you could pick a Kraken player, or you could pick any player if you want, JT. Or you could pick both.
I'm gonna pick Yanni.
Okay.
Obviously, have a prior relationship. I know him well, and also he's handy. If I'm down a deserted island, I need somebody that can build a hut or put some type of shelter, because it's not gonna be me. I am not.
Oh, I know.
I am not handy. Okay, this is bad. I'm gonna say it anyway. So when I have 3 different stud finders for the wall, somehow they all don't work.
Do you always test it on yourself? That's what Jake does. He puts the stud finder on his chest. He's like, it's working, because it beats.
Okay, no.
You've never done that?
No, I'm going to talk to him.
That surprises me that you've never done that.
It's the perfect dad joke.
But
JT's not really into dad jokes.
It's
not your personality.
Well, not really.
He just tattoos himself in Pokemon instead.
There you go.
Exactly. But going back to why, so I have 3 of them. Some of them find the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them find the outside. And I'm going through, and eventually it just doesn't work. The light beeps, and I'm like, oh, okay, boom. And I, do the drill, and it goes through, and it's just right through the drywall. I'm like, what? I just did it. So eventually I just start making holes until I hit the stud. I just go every inch, and eventually I just have 10 different holes or however many going through, and I make a bigger mess. So I am not the person when it comes to being handy. So I would pick Yanni. That would be easy. If I had to pick somebody just league wide, I don't know him, but just from stories and experience and what I hear, it would probably be Brent Burns. I'm pretty sure he has a farm, but he also has the backpack. He brings coffee.
He's pretty outdoorsy.
I just feel outdoorsy enough that. I would also pick Justin Falk too, because that'd be a fun time. But
he's your homie though.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with those 2. Those are gonna be my 2 answers. I feel like Brent Burns would be able to survive in the wilderness.
I think I would also go Yanni for the same exact reasons, because he is one of the players that I has demonstrated some significant life skills outside of the game. Versus Maddie Beniers and Will Borgen told me last year one time.
No.
They told me that they were trying to make cookies. I think it was for Maddie's mom, or she was visiting and they wanted to make cookies. And Maddie told me they kept opening the oven and they were like, why isn't it cooking? And they didn't hit start on the temperature or something. It was something like that.
Oh no.
Maddie, I'm sorry if you hear that. I just totally exposed you. But no, it was hilarious. He was like, I don't know what we did wrong. And I was like, Maddie. But now tough. I have gotten updates that they've actually both been experimenting much more in the kitchen. And I guess Maddie got really, really good at cooking over the summer, according to Will. So shout out them. But
the bar was
I don't know if they're
going
to be building a hut for survival.
Yeah, but the bar for them was low, right? For Will and Maddie, so really good could just be everybody else is okay. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm. But I think Yanni would be excellent.
Oh, yeah, 100%. That would, without a doubt. He might even still be my first overall, but I wanted to give a different perspective. He still might be there.
All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts? That's all that I had for us for episode number 23 of Signals from the Deep.
No, I mean, that was great. I had a lot of fun being on here, and hopefully everybody listening did as well, and can't wait for the next one.
Yeah.
See you in 2 weeks. Yeah.
See you in 2 weeks. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening to Signals from the Deep. Leave us a review, please, on Apple Podcasts. Leave us 5-star rating. Leave us a comment. You can tweet at us if you guys have any questions or comments or anything. We love to hear from you guys. So feel free to engage with us online. And JT, it's going to be great to have you sticking around here. Grant, great work as always.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time here on Signals from the Deep.
Signals from the Deep is the official podcast of your Seattle Kraken and is a proud member of the Kraken Hockey Network. Hosted by Piper Shaw and JT Brown. Music composed by Benny Drawbars. Production by Grant Beery. Have a question for the show? Send an email to signals@seattlekraken.com or call the hotline at 206-279-7810. Your message could be featured on an upcoming episode.